In the heart of a village, where dusty paths wound between small clay huts and the horizon stretched endlessly in golden fields, lived a man named Dev. He was a farmer, just as his father and grandfather had been. His life was tied to the soil, his hands rough, his shoulders scarred from years of carrying plows, and his face weathered from the relentless sun. Dev owned only a small piece of land, barely enough to feed his family. He had no fancy machines, no tractors, no wealth tucked away in banks. What he had was a pair of bullocks, a few wooden tools, and an unshakable bond with the earth beneath his feet. Every morning, before the first rooster crowed, Dev rose. The village slept, but he walked into his fields with a sickle in one hand and hope in the other. He sowed seeds not just into the ground, but into his dreams. He believed that if he worked hard enough, if he poured enough sweat into the soil, his family would never go hungry. But life, as it often does, tested his faith in ways he never imagined. One year, the rains came too late. The earth cracked open, thirsty and unforgiving. The seeds Dev had planted lay lifeless, never sprouting. His family survived that year on borrowed grain. The next year, when the rains finally arrived, they didn't stop. Floods swept across his fields, drowning his crops. His harvest rotted before his eyes. It seemed as though nature itself had turned against him. Each evening, Dev returned home with drooping shoulders. His wife tried to comfort him, but her own eyes carried the same fear. Their children, too young to understand the complexities of farming, simply asked, "Baba, will we eat today?" That question stabbed deeper than any wound. Villagers often mocked him gently. "Why struggle like this, Dev? Sell the land! Move to the city! There are easier jobs than breaking your back for nothing." Dev never argued. He only smiled faintly and said, "This soil has fed my family for generations. I will not abandon it now." But deep inside, he wrestled with doubts. Was he being foolish? Was he sacrificing his family's future by clinging to land that gave him only suffering? One night, after another failed harvest, Dev sat outside his hut, staring at the moonlit fields. His son, barely 10, sat beside him. "Baba," the boy asked quietly, "why do you work so hard if the land gives us nothing?" The words pierced Dev's heart like a spear. His throat tightened. What could he say? How could he explain the bond between man and soil, the patience farming demanded, the lessons hidden in failure? He placed a calloused hand on his son's head and whispered, "One day you will understand." But inside, he wondered if even he understood anymore. The next year, Dev decided that he would not let fate alone decide his family's life. If the land demanded more of him, he would give more, not in strength, but in knowledge. He began to walk miles to nearby towns, listening to agricultural experts speak. He borrowed books from the village library and studied them under a dim lantern at night. He asked questions from anyone who seemed wiser than him. That year, he learned about rainwater harvesting, about building small trenches to trap and store rain. He learned about crop rotation, about planting hardy crops that survived with little water. He learned about organic manure, about restoring the strength of the soil instead of draining it. When Dev returned and began digging trenches in his small field, villagers laughed. "This man has gone mad," they said. "He thinks he can fight the sky with ditches." But Dev ignored them. His hands blistered, his back ached, but he kept digging. Every drop of rain that fell, however little, was captured in his trenches. He sowed new crops, millets instead of rice, legumes instead of wheat. They required less water, but still promised food. Months passed. The rains were weak that year again. Most fields in the village lay barren and dry. Farmers sat with their heads in their hands, wondering how to survive. But when people passed Dev's field, they stopped. Green shoots stretched upward from his soil. His crops were alive. The same neighbors who once laughed now whispered in disbelief. Some even asked, "How did you do this, Dev?" He didn't boast. He simply smiled and said, "I stored the rain that came. I learned to give the soil what it needed, not what I wanted." That harvest was not abundant, but it was enough. Enough to feed his family without debt, enough to send his children to school without begging, enough to remind him that hope was not dead. Encouraged by his small victory, Dev kept experimenting. Each year, he improved his methods. He built small check dams with the help of friends. He planted trees around his fields to protect them from the wind and to preserve moisture. He used natural compost instead of expensive chemical fertilizers. Slowly, his land transformed. His fields, once lifeless, now flourished. Grain swayed in the wind, vegetables grew fresh and healthy. His bullocks were strong again, his granary no longer empty. But Dev's success wasn't his alone. He began teaching others what he had learned. He gathered farmers under a banyan tree and shared his methods. Some were skeptical, but many followed. The entire village began to change. Fields once barren turned green, wells filled with water again. For the first time in years, children in the village went to bed with full stomachs. Years later, when Dev's hair had begun to gray, the village faced another trial. That year, heavy storms swept the region. Rain fell in violent torrents. Crops in surrounding villages were destroyed overnight. But Dev's fields stood resilient. His trees shielded his crops, his soil retained its strength, and his water channels directed the flood safely. While others lost everything, Dev's harvest survived enough not only for his family, but to share with hungry neighbors. Reporters came to see his fields. Officials wrote about his methods. Farmers from faraway villages traveled just to meet him. When asked, "How did you succeed when everyone else failed?" Dev replied with humility, "Farming is not about one harvest. It is about preparing in times of plenty for the times of struggle. The soil rewards patience, not shortcuts." As the years rolled on, Dev grew older. His children, once hungry and doubtful, now stood proudly beside him. They didn't dream of escaping to the city anymore. They dreamed of expanding his vision, of making the village stronger. Schools invited Dev to speak. Young students listened, eye wide, as he described his struggles. Farmers who once mocked him now bowed with respect. But whenever someone praised him as a great man, Dev always smiled and said, "I am not great. I am simply a farmer who refused to give up. The soil was my teacher. Every failure was my lesson. Every seed was my hope." His story spread not because he became the richest man in the village, but because he embodied the true meaning of success. Success is not just money in the bank or applause from the crowd. It is the courage to rise again after falling. It is the patience to keep sowing even when the rains fail. It is the willingness to learn, to adapt, and to share. His struggles taught that real wealth is not what you hoard, but what you nurture. Real power is not in loudness, but in persistence. So whenever you feel life has tested you too much, whenever your efforts seem wasted, remember Dev, the farmer who stood in his cracked, barren field and chose not to give up. He showed the world that success is not comfort, but character, not applause, but perseverance, not riches, but resilience. And above all, his struggle revealed a timeless truth. The real meaning of success is not in what you gain, but in what you grow, even in the harshest of seasons.